Hello, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when this comes across your desk. I'm back for another quick little conversation on some things I've been working on in slurry modeling, and specifically this time a consideration for like settled versus unsettled slurry flow regimes. So, why am I concerned with settled solids and pipelines? Typically, you want to be operating your system at a speed above anywhere that something's going to settle at, above that deposition limit velocity. But there are some times you just can't avoid it. And in the process I currently work in, the main one is starting up on a loaded line. So if you have a long line, it's very expensive and time consuming to, purge it out with just clean water. So you're going to stop that puppy. Everything that's suspended is going to settle out, and you're going to have to come back up to a certain velocity for things to start moving again. And depending on, the length of your system, the number of pumps, the head generated per pump, like it could take a long time for that system to reach an operational speed that you need to be at. Even if a long time is only 10 or 15 minutes, it could be critical in your process. Included here, just for kind of demonstration purposes, is an image I stole from GIW. I put a citation, so please don't sue me. But essentially, this is just giving you a visualization of what the four component model is assuming in the calculation. So you need to be above that deposition limit velocity where everything in the pipeline is moving. There should be nothing stationary. All the mass fractions, your fines, your pseudo-homogeneous, your heterogeneous, and your stratified, all those things should be moving. Nothing should be sitting still. Well, at a low enough flow rate, they're sitting still. So how do we come to terms with that in a model? I can show you how I did it. So here is an image I took from Engineering LibreText. These are the two sections that I mainly pulled from. So this is the SRC model, that's Saskatchewan Research Council model. I think it's a pretty old one, a couple of decades old. Although I think they're still updating it, so an updated model, but one that's been around for a while to my understanding. So the first step I did, I said, well, I'm going to assume that I have a bed where all the XH and all the excess particles are settled. That means that V2 equals 0. Then I said, well, it's also packed 100%, which, you know, is not possible for these particles, right? You're going to have some flow going through them. But maybe this will be close enough. So with those assumptions in place, those gross assumptions in place, you can then go on to calculate this A2 using the formula listed here. Essentially, you're just taking the total area minus the fraction of the solid's volume that is supposedly settled. So once you do that, you're left with a 100% settled bed that would really have to be a brick, but is not, and a working fluid that is now only carrying the fines and the pseudo-homogeneous fraction within the body of it. And you're also pumping that through a reduced pipe area. Ultimately, that's going to cause a change in your system energy losses as well as your pump head performance. So you're going to calculate an entirely different pump curve, an entirely different system curve compared to what the four component model would yield. And that's shown here. So the four component model is shown in red, and this new settled two-layer model is shown in blue. So we can see at lower flow rates, considerably lower energy consumption, but as we cross this critical point here, well, not necessarily critical point, but this intersection, we now see that the settled model is going to consume more energy. And that's just due to the fact that the flow velocities are much locally higher per GPM when you have some of that cross-sectional area cut out. Considering this, we got a couple new challenges. Number one is like, where am I operating? So when you do that pump curve and system curve calculation, there are some pump schedules or combinations of your pumps being on or speeds that will yield results where the system appears to be operating in like two different points. So this blue curve and blue dotted line are the settled two-layer model system and pump curve, and the red are the GIWs, four-component model results. So we see here the red curve, the red pump curve intersects the red system curve, and the blue pump curve intersects the blue system curve. So under either one, like each one could be happening. Really, there's a caveat that says that this GIW one should not exist. But assuming that you just looked at this straight up, you would imagine that you would go from this settled to this unsettled, and you would have a flow rate change, a pretty considerable flow rate change, like over 1,000 G or near 1,000 GPM, right? Well, reviewing process data, it's pretty clear that that is not real. So here's a flow rate measurement for a line coming up, and you can see it really only goes up. There's no steep decline. There's no like giant step down where this happens, right? So this whole idea for this process should be rejected. Not possible, right? Or not real. On top of that, if you look at the results for a model in GIW slice cell, which is uses the 4-component model programmed in it, it will give you a rejection to a solution where your pump curve apparently intersects the system curve. This is due to the fact, or most likely due, doesn't actually say, but it's most likely due to the fact that the operating point that it would show here is below the deposition limit velocity of the slurry, which is a consideration that the 4-component model does list. And under that same consideration, this crossing of the red pump and system curve should equally be rejected. So I was like, well, if that's not real, maybe I should just follow this curve up to where it intersects the GIW curve. So you take the minimum of the value between the system curves at each GPM, and you create a new function here that follows, the settled 2-layer model up to the point it intersects the GIW 4-component model, and then it follows that. That works really good if there's no sealing water. However, if you now consider this on a head loss per foot consideration, so we actually take the minimum of the I values between the settled and the 4-component model, you get this interesting little transitional region here that is probably closer to real life. It's probably still not accurate, but you're going to have something like this occurring depending on the amount of sealing water going in your line. It's a pretty considerable region. In this estimation, it's like 1400 GPM. So essentially what's going on is some of your pipes are settled and some of them are flowing that XH and XS fractions. And that's just due to the difference in flow velocity due to the GPM difference caused by the sealing water. So the pipes close to your discharge are going to have a higher local flow velocity and reach that deposition limit velocity quicker than pumps back at the start. The result of that is this kind of, piecewise adding of minimums between different regimes that results in this shape. Well, is that important? So that multi-regime region, it's well below the desired operating point of the system for my processes, and thus accurately describing it is, a pretty little benefit. It's not something we want to sit at. We want to hit it, punch through it, and get to that 4-component, everything's moving. Based upon that, I decided on the following hierarchy. If the 4-component model pump curve intersects the 4-component model system curve at a flow rate greater than the S-min, which would be this point here where they two intersect, and the settle curve intersects the transition region, we should be using the 4-component model. Else, we need to utilize the settled bed pump curve and settled bed system curve. And my reasoning behind that is, just operationally speaking, the line should not be slowed down to an operating speed below the 4-component model compliance speed once it is up and running. And we really shouldn't be operating within that multi-regime region. I should have tried to say that out loud before I named it, for long during our startup. So really, once we get to it and through it, we should just be in the 4-component model area and just riding that high. The other consideration is that if the settle curve never intersects that transition region, those solids probably should never start moving. And if they never start moving, we can never actually get to the 4-component model region. So if The JW pump curve intersected really close to here. However, the settled region was for some reason like down here before where it intersects that area here. The solids probably haven't started moving, assuming we're coming up from 0. And we should reject the JW4 component model. And that's all I got for now. I'd love to hear ideas or feedback on, what I'm reasoning here. Thank you.